that goes back to like not needing to be liked. I became a much more effective leader the less I cared about being liked. Because that's not my job, actually. In some cases, as CEO, it's my job to be the bullseye. Because you're ultimately the one taking responsibility. And so if you can get comfy with that, I think that's when I started to see myself more as a CEO than I ever felt in the beginning.
I'm Matt Tate, founder of Decimal and fellow entrepreneur. Yes, I'm one of the crazy ones. I've chosen time and time again to hustle my way through that first million. Now, I'm scaling to the next 50. So I know firsthand what the messy middle is really like. And I know that entrepreneurs and leaders like us need a destination for empowerment, community, and encouragement. This is our place. This is After the First Million. All right, welcome to After the First Million. I am really excited today to talk to and introduce you all to Devin Bramhall, who in our story is the first person I've ever met who, when I asked, like, what are the cool things about you? She said, well, I stood up in a meeting one time with a CEO and he asked everybody else what job they wanted. And she said, I want your job. And after that, she led a company through that messy middle. She has been there and led companies through exactly what we like to talk about, as well as, I think, some pretty crazy roller coasters of stuff. Devin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Me too. And to get us started, I always joke that you have to be a little crazy to start or run a company. When did you know that you were one of the crazy ones?
Once I became CEO, because I thought going into it that everybody wanted that job. I was like, clearly, I'm going to have to compete viciously for this position. Like, this is the best position anyone could ever have. And I really, truly believed that so much that it never occurred to me that literally most people don't want it and actively try not to do that job. And so I'm thinking I'm like the luckiest person in the world, which I am in many ways. But it turns out I was not competing with a lot of people for the role of CEO because the number of people who do not want that job is most people.
Podcasts and content out there, I think sometimes way over glorify that job.
Yes.
How long did it take you to have your, oh shit, this is different than I thought moment?
I think it's that I knew going into it that I was unprepared for it. I just know that I am meant to do this job and that I will do it well. But I hadn't done any like research. I didn't grow up in like working at a more formal work institution. I grew up in startups. And so I'd never seen a CEO job done elegantly and with process. And so I was just like, I can do this. And then the whole time as I was going along, I was like, oh, that's harder than I thought.
So a lot of people that we have on here, it kind of varies two types of groups. One group are founders that lead through that first million and then into the messy middle. But you are not the founder, but the leader through that messy middle part of it. Talk about what kind of got you to that point. Like for me, one of the big tipping points in your story is that infamous meeting where you stood up and said, I want your job. But what kind of got you to the point where you're like, you know what? I can do that. I can jump off this diving board into the pool.
Yeah. I can't pin down the precise moment, but it was in the first year that I joined Animalz. Myself and Haley Bryant, who is the COO, we were both put into our C-level roles at the same time. We were hired within a week of each other. From the get-go, we saw the potential in what had been built thus far and had opinions and ideas and vision around what it could be without even trying. It was just like I was born and raised a marketer in startups serving B2B. That's exactly who this agency served and what they did. And so I think that vision and that passion for what the business did, and then being around other passionate people put me in that mindset without even realizing it. And then it was really towards the end of that first year that Haley and I started thinking about, okay, like one day we'd like to take this over. And I think what was cool was the founder, he really spent that first year and a half trying to figure out what he wanted from his life. And he had the realization, you know what? I don't really want to be a CEO. I want to continue to start businesses, but he didn't want to be that operator. And so it just sort of organically transpired that I was like, oh, this is the job for me. And it helped that Haley had the same vision as well. Like she wanted to be the COO. She did not want the role that I had. And so we sort of like fell into these places organically as we dove into the work and started growing the company.
So help me take a step back. And I always have a tendency to jump way ahead and all over the place. But for our listeners, tell us what Animals did and does. Marketing can mean a lot of things.
Yes. So we were a B2B content marketing agency. And so we worked with our clients to develop content strategy to help them grow inbound traffic through long form content. Some of it optimized for search. We were experts in writing SEO content, but also things like thought leadership, some of those mid funnel assets that folks would need as part of their campaigns, like ebooks and white papers. And we did a report for Google once that they distributed at their big Google conference. So we were really long form content during that heyday that's recently over of search content driven organic growth through content. And, when I started there was only like 18 people at the company. It was small, but it had a really good reputation. And so did Walter. And so he'd already worked with some darling startups and had kind of a nice foundation. And that just made it that much easier for us to kind of build on that word of mouth reputation relatively quickly because it sort of had a nice base. And I consider that one of our greatest differentiators was like, people ask me, they're like, how did you grow to 12 million? What was your marketing strategy? And I was like, we didn't even eat our own dog food, as it were. Our blog was not for search. We just wrote thought leadership. The majority of our business came through word of mouth. So I'm like, I'm a terrible example because we didn't do any of the things that are logical that most companies do to grow in the early days. So,
You and I both have seen hundreds of marketing companies, and they come and go quite frequently. Solopreneurs, the one person marketing shop is a boomerang I feel like a lot of people do in the marketing space. But you were able to grow a team from 18 to, I believe, over 100 people. Talk about that because your background is in marketing, but then you jump into a role of a seat that is all of a sudden more.
yeah. I also don't have a business school degree. Like, there was so much that at the time I didn't think about as absurd. I was just like, "Well, I want this job. I can do this job. I'm gonna do this job. I'm doing this job." And I guess it's funny when people ask questions like this, it kind of reflects back to me. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's kind of weird, isn't it?" Like, I wasn't even at, like, CMO when I became CEO. It's like I'd kind of catapulted over the series of, like, less than 10 years and skipped over a few roles, few educations. So, yeah, the people front, that's a tricky thing about an agency is you are so dependent upon talent that figuring out the process for identifying the type of talent you need, both in skills, in professional skills, and then, as an agency specifically, there's the challenge of turnover. People love to start to learn through agencies because you get exposure to a lot, but it's easy to get bored because you don't actually get to get as deep into the creative work as you would think. My biggest challenge was how do I take a circumstance and turn it into an opportunity for us so that we can try to retain talent for longer and use that to enhance our brand at the same time. So I changed our mission when I took over to making the internet a more helpful place. And the way that we did that was through working with our customers to show them what great looks like. So they're not just receiving the content from us, we're working with them so they understand that new bar. So they're distributing out in the world. That's exponential impact. And then through our talent, so we were a teaching org. We had levels of each IC, individual contributor that you could move through. And we built training into our operation. So like each team had an editor, that editor helped the writers on their team improve their writing overall, not just polish a piece. And so the idea was we're sending the best content marketers out in the world to go to other companies and teach them. So that was like a solution to probably one of the biggest challenges we faced, especially because I started in 2020 and 2021 came along and there was such an increase in turnover and money was free. So all the startups that we worked for were like, we want to hire your people and we can pay 3 times what you pay. To be honest, I can attribute pretty much the majority of my success in growing animals to process. If we're going to scale this operation, I need to figure out how I can spread quality control across multiple, not just teammates, but teams to develop a level of consistency. We need opinions, like we need documented opinions about what good looks like, because obviously good or quality is a subjective concept. And then things like values, right? Like I changed our values so that again, there's this sort of inherent foundation and structure that everyone has to ground them and make this sort of consistent bedrock. And then their creativity can kind of bloom on top of that.
I tell everybody all the time that everybody's got a dumpster fire. It's just a matter of how many and where.
Yeah, exactly.
I love your winding background of how you got there because, like, for me, I always joke, I'm a recovering attorney.
Yeah.
My entire background was in a bunch of liberal arts bullshit that I literally don't use today, but my kids are starting to read to the point where that will be the first application of my college degree. But I love that. I think that creative thinking, so many great, successful leaders and entrepreneurs that I know didn't come through that business school background. Many I know did as well. There's more than one path to success. But let me pull it back to your story because there seems to be a trend that's kind of running through it, which is you really revamped and changed the culture of the company. And when you talk about process and the importance of process and documentation, but then you also on the other side talk about the kind of soft part of it too, which is the people, the talent, the culture, the values, the mission.
And the vision too. That one was really important. It's like process plus vision is like most of what you need.
But you also have to have the day-to-day anchor of the values. That kind of sits in between and it's a little bit of a Venn diagram, but you kind of talk about all of that, which is, vision keeps people there for the long term, but values keep them there today.
Well said. I'd never thought about it that way, but yeah.
We talk about a lot at Decimal at our company is our values. And I bring it up almost 4 or 5 times a day, some value that we have. And I find that that anchors people in it. And it seems like it helps people get buy-in. I mean, is that what you found as you started hiring and teaching and cultivating that? You're talking a lot about buy-in.
Yeah. You can create values all day long. There's plenty of companies that will proudly state their values. It's whether or not you operate against them and build those values into every aspect of the company. And that's something that we did. There's 2 values, bravery and curiosity. Those 2 were really important to me and like very core to my being. I believe in those so much that I still repeat them together to this day because for me, it takes bravery to be curious. I mean, look at right now, there's so much volatility. Like a lot of our norms are being disrupted over the past several years. And there's so many people reacting in fear. And a lot of times that fear reaction is to like hold on to things you've always done before, even if they're not working, or resistance to change. And so I think as creatives, you need to be excited about change and curious about new things all the time. And so that's why I believe like the bravery piece is so important. I also think it takes bravery working with customers because you're basically like putting yourself out there all the time for them to judge. So you need that just day to day too.
At least a couple of times a week, I'm dealing with some form of imposter syndrome of like, can I do this? Like, did I do the right thing? Am I the right person on this? And it's that kind of resilience and bravery that gets you to keep walking.
Yeah, especially because I really didn't grow up in the same sort of life structure that everybody else did. There's a lot of things that folks take for granted that I'm like, I just never even knew that wheel existed in the first place. It made me, over the course of my life, question myself, I think, even more because I'm like, I don't even know what the mold is. I never learned it. And so for me, the big wide open was really big from the get-go because I didn't really have the same, like, things I could take for granted. You wanna know what's funny? The day that I really felt like I'd made it as a CEO was the first time I got a really vicious Glassdoor review. I was like, "Finally, I'm just like everybody else." Because in the beginning, it was like, the first year it was like 100%. Everybody was like, "The CEO is great." And I was like, "You're not giving me credit for the things I'm making mistakes about." And it used to bug me. I'm like, "The thing you're mad at, like, you should be giving me that credit." And so once I finally started getting credit for that, that's when I started to be a lot more confident.
And for those people that don't know, Glassdoor is a fun, anonymous, usually former employee review website.
Yes.
And so if you've never gotten one, it's a blast. And rarely do you get really great ones that jump out in your head. But how did that make you feel?
That was tough. I mean, I think the hard thing for me was I was actually trying and succeeding a lot. Like, I can say that with confidence. Like, I listened to my team. I gave them, like, a lot more than they had when I started in terms of, like, benefits and pay and transparency, and when there was something that the team wanted, I think it was benefits for children. I opened up our balance sheet, and I was like, "Here's why this doesn't work. It's like 20% of you have kids. The amount it would cost takes up the entire budget for stuff, which means 80% of the company gets nothing." I was trying really hard to be the leader that I had never had. And when people started writing things that just weren't true, like they weren't factual, they don't take that stuff down. There was a me that was manufactured that wasn't accurate. It started to feel like, wow, why am I working so hard to be good when this is the story that's being painted about me? What I forgot to remember is perspective. The vast majority of people didn't feel that way and thought the folks writing those things looked crazy. And clients kept coming to us, talent kept coming to us, but it's hard to ignore those really loud, small group of people. It broke my heart at times. It really demoralized me after a while because 2021 was just rough in general with how people behaved.
So tell me more about that.
Once I left Animals and started coaching other agencies, every single agency owner was coming to me in a panic. They're like, "What happened to everybody? Why are they so mean?" I think the pandemic just made a lot of people crazy. I think if we were to zoom out a couple years, we could very plainly see a line in the sand in terms of like sanity. The internet is a big contributor to that. You can just see it in so many different places. And we've seen it since the beginning. The veil of the screen makes people feel brave in a way that they shouldn't and changes their personalities. And I guess like now we're in a generation where there's a generation below us and they think we're all idiots. Millennials, I feel like failed on every front. Like apparently we just didn't do any job we were supposed to do.
Oh, yeah, it's great. I think that those of us that led during the pandemic, let alone our employees and for me, our kids, there's a trauma we're going to unwind for a long time. I also think there were some good things that came out of it, but you started as CEO days before the pandemic hit.
And I asked for that, similar to asking for the CEO job, which is one of the reasons why I fundamentally believe I was right for the job because I saw what was coming.
Oh, you were also in New York, which was literally the like epicenter of terrible for it. So
I saw what was coming down, and I had put together a transition timeline for me to take over in 2020. And I looked at Walter and I said, "Hey, man, the team's going to need someone to help them through this, to help lead them through this." And I was like, "That's not you. It's got to be me." I didn't mean that in like a mean way. It's just like that wasn't the type of leader he was. And so I was like, "We got to do this ASAP." And I was right, like my style of leadership. I remember I used to write these weekly notes to the team, and I got this reputation for making everybody cry. I think I started one with like, "I've been thinking a lot about eels." And I tell this whole story and kind of connect it back. And it was just like my way of kind of rallying folks together. So yeah, it's funny. In 2020, I could do no wrong. I got great marks for supporting the team through a crisis. That was pretty cool. But yeah, it was wild. And that was during the time when I was like learning how to do the job. And I think leaning on my executive team was what got me through. Is I had an incredible HR person, Nicole Nesman, Haley, my COO, and we just came together, got in that rabbit hole, and we're like, "We're gonna do this."
So you've mentioned Haley a couple of times, and for me at Decimal, we've grown really substantially, and I couldn't do it without having great partners and a great leadership team to lean on at all stages because there's a lot that I'm terrible at.
Yeah.
You keep talking about Haley. Do you feel like a lot of your growth was having her as a partner or the leadership team that you had in place to help fill the gaps of what you didn't know?
Oh, yeah, we were 2 peas in a pod from the get-go. It's like we both had complementary skill sets. I guess I joined a week before, she joined a week after. So, like, from the day she joined, we just had the same principles and, like, the right foundational things were aligned. We complemented each other in terms of skill set, and then, like, had different points of view in ways that I think enhanced both of us in our leadership, our knowledge. That was certainly the case for me, and so at no point was it just me that made this happen, ever, and I knew that, and that was one of my favorite things about leading a company, was I was like, "I know I can't do this without my team." And that makes me feel better, because understanding that you have people that you can lean on to do a big thing feels great. And knowing that you can't do it without them, for some reason, gave me that bravery in a way. Because I'm like, if it's just on me, we're single point of failure. I didn't have that. I had multiple people. And so it was like, that made me feel a lot of power behind me to like keep doing things, making mistakes, making good decisions.
It's always both. You grew that company very fast and very substantially. And you talk about 2020, you could do no wrong. A lot of cash is inflected into the market, then 2021 becomes hard. I talk a lot with business owners about inflection points. Like businesses reach inflection points of what you are doing today is not going to work tomorrow. You probably were hitting those relatively rapidly. Talk about some of those inflection points as you got to the over 100 in just a couple of years.
I wish someone had told me about these inflection points before I started. It was my old boss, Sunit, who's still a mentor of mine. He's like, "Yeah, so when you hit like 25 people, 50, and then there's like 75 to 100, and then there's like 350 or something. There's like these employee volume marks." No one told me. I learned that after. So I just barreled into all of them and then was like, "What's happening? Why is this stuff no longer working?" So I'd say like 2020 was great. We went into 2021, I think, good, because 2021 was a great revenue year. It was a tumultuous people year. I think the first one, we were prepared from a process standpoint, but then certain parts of our process broke. So it was past 50. It was like when we are hitting that 75 mark, and since I didn't see it coming, it was clunkier than I thought. And then I reached that phase where I thought everybody had to like me on my team, and so then I started making decisions that I thought were useful, but actually made people unhappy. Like, there was this point when I remember we were big enough that I didn't know everyone on the team, and I was like, "I need to meet with every person we hire once a month for the first 3 months," or maybe it was, like, even once a week. It was a dumb idea, and I was like, "I need to show them that I'm here for them," and I was dead inside after a month because we were hiring fast because we had tons of demand. I mean, I literally had to play the Fed that year. I had to raise prices to slow demand because I didn't want to get known as an agency that wasn't available. We were booking clients 3 months out. And of course, we're seeing a lot of turnover because all these companies that have tons of money are hiring our people out from underneath us, et cetera. So it was like, it was bonkers. I put these wild things in place. And then we had a few like bad apples on the team. And I've never seen anything like it before, where one person can come in and create a set of beliefs and influence people so deeply that it never goes away for that small cohort. And I think what I was trying to do was I wanted them to see, I'm good, I'm trying to be good. Like, I worked really hard to try to win them over, and that backfired tremendously. It used to make me so mad. Walter used to talk about that philosophy, like, hire slow, fire faster, and I was like, "No, I'm not gonna be that way, like, I don't think that's right." Oh my lord, that is the most correct thing I've ever heard in my life.
Being a CEO and a parent is very similar at times. And I find that everything I swore I would never do as a parent, like tell my kids I told you so, after the 300th why, when they're 4 years old, you finally just yell it. And then it becomes easier from that point forward. And some of those things that you say, like, as a boss, I'm not going to hire slow and fire fast. And then after a while, you're like, holy crap, I got to get this person out.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've noticed in rapid growth, and I'm interested if some of your bad apples were this way, that sometimes you bring somebody from the outside who negatively affects culture, but other times you have somebody from the inside that as the business has changed, they didn't adapt and change with it. And that's almost harder and worse.
That is everything. The most yes to that. I've seen it across companies too, because what happens for those people is that they become a poisoned apple. I've seen manipulation at a scale that I never even thought was possible. One person wanted to start a union, and it was so bizarre. And it was just like the way they went about it was to like poison everybody against the company because that's like how unions work, I guess. And I observed how much it hurt the rest of the culture because the amount of time we had to spend on it by not firing them faster. Like, the majority of people are doing really well and are fine, but now we're starting to ignore them because we're so stressed out about this thing. We're like, "What if we're on the phone with lawyers, with HR, whatever?" And I wish I'd been more brave and just been like, "Bye, we'll deal with it later."
Well, and those are the times where you stop focusing on the vision, you stop looking forward and you start looking down at your feet.
Yes.
And that makes it feel worse. I love moving forward. I love going faster. I love going up. Standing still doesn't just feel like standing still, it feels like moving backwards almost.
Yes. And also, like, I've been mentoring people since before I knew how to do anything, and I love to help people. And so, what I wish I had understood before is that sometimes helping people is giving them hard feedback, is letting them go, because, quote unquote, being the bad cop, usually, if you're a good person with principles around treating people well, usually what brands you as a bad cop is just saying the truth and people not liking it. And I think that when the more you can be the person who shows to people, like, here are your opportunities, here's who you could be, and then letting them rise to the occasion. And I realize that this is not probably the most popular thing to say during a time when a lot of really good people are being laid off for reasons other than their skills or ability to grow, but, like, it is still true that you also need to, for everyone's benefit, let people go who can't adapt to change or simply aren't right for the job. They can't rise to the occasion. They never develop that skill set that you need. Because we promoted a lot of people from within, and I made the mistake of doing it based on skill in a certain marketing area, not necessarily management, and that hurt not just the company, but those people too, because I think in a way I might have set them up for failure and not known it.
If our purpose here is to talk to other CEOs, to founders, to people that want to be, there are hard truths to having these types of roles. And the more that you hide from them or put your head in the sand when these are discussed, you're going to realize hire slow and fire fast is actually the best thing that you can do for everybody involved. I'm hoping that people listen to this because, popular or not, it's the truth. Most of the time when I fire people, it's a good thing for them too. Like, they've been as unhappy in the role as I've been having them in the role.
Yeah.
It may take them a while to get there in a couple of Glassdoor statements, but eventually they get there.
That goes back to, like, not needing to be liked. I became a much more effective leader the less I cared about being liked, because that's not my job, actually. In some cases, as CEO, it's my job to be the bullseye, because you're ultimately the one taking responsibility. And so if you can get comfy with that, I think that's when I started to see myself more as a CEO than I ever felt in the beginning. It was interesting to notice how women reacted to having a female leader, because I noticed they put on me the same types of beliefs and expectations that are commonly associated with men, especially as it relates to how I acted. If you want to be a CEO, you have to have a thick skin. People are telling you you're garbage 6 ways from Sunday every single day. And throughout my career, being ambitious, if you're ambitious in your career, I don't care how you identify, you agitate things along the way. You have to overlook a lot of bad behavior in order to do the job. And I thought it was interesting how, like, at times, something about being nice or, like, not giving me credit for mistakes that I made, being like, "Oh, it's the chairman, really, like, he's influencing." I'm like, "No, I decided this, like, this
Right.
is my decision. No, I'm not gonna be your angel of mercy. That's not my job. My job is to represent, maintain the health of the company and grow the company healthily over time. That's it." That requires a commitment to more than one group,
Right.
which means that I'm never gonna make everybody happy, and that is the job, and I loved that part of the job because it was hard, because you're constantly presented with equations that don't add up to X, and you have to figure out how to make it. I wished I was able to show more people that, like, really help them see, that's what we're doing here.
One of the things I've found is the bigger you grow and the more successful the business becomes, the more isolated you get. It isolates you from the business, from the people that you used to team up and partner with. It isolates you from the people that you brought in. It just becomes a very lonely place to be at times. You've also seen that too. You are growing a really great company, and then life happened on life's terms.
Yeah, I got cancer. End of 2021, I went to the dentist, and they were like, "There's this weird thing in your mouth." Like, it was, like, kinda high up in my cheek on the inside, and they were like, "What is this?" And if that's not an ad for going to the dentist twice a year, I don't know what is. It turned out to be cancer, and that time I was lucky because I didn't have to do chemo, but the recovery, like, they made it seem like I was going to get my wisdom teeth out, and they're like, "Listen, you can be back to work in a few days." Meanwhile, they took out 2 of my top right molars, part of my jawbone, and a bunch of tissue towards, like, the back of my mouth and throat, and it's like, I could barely eat for a month. I had to go to the ER for malnutrition because of how hard it was to eat. This has happened to me twice now, where it's like, it's hard to figure out how to show up authentically. Honestly, I was worried that I was gonna come across as weak. I was worried that being sick would make me look weak. I've always taken pride in my strength to overcome anything, and I was like, I didn't wanna tell too many people. It happened the second time I had cancer, because then I was a consultant, and I was like, what if they start to see me as this, like, sick person? I think that was one of the many moments where having the team behind you to support you is so helpful, and I think the decision that I made to strategically be open about it with my team and on LinkedIn too, I kept it at that inspiring place where I did not tell the whole truth, and I never would have because that would have been counterproductive and weird. But it's like that whole idea of like, don't bring your whole self to work. Bring the parts of you to work that will serve a bigger purpose or accomplish something. And I figured out a way to do that. You can't just like ignore that this big thing happened. It'd be weird and people wouldn't trust you. But you also can't go so far as to be like, oh man, this is hard. So it's like, how do you go in that inspiring middle?
They don't tell you that at some point you may have to be vulnerable and find strength in vulnerability.
That's hard. And I always thought of myself like my parents were emotionally intelligent. I've been in therapy and coaching for most of my life. Like I always believed I had the tools. I really didn't know what vulnerability was until I got cancer, both times. The second time it was worse. You don't realize like, oh, I have not fully tapped into what it means to be vulnerable in front of other people. I'm a completely different person now for the better. Like things don't bother me like they used to, and I'm really grateful for that. I wish other people could get that without going through what I went
Without
through, but
trauma?
yeah. There is the gift that I got from being sick both of those times. I have such gratitude for what I got out of it, even though it was hard.
Well, and it sounds too like one of the things you're really kind of circling around and alluding to is shit happens. But if you have the right team and the right tools that you've given yourself, you can get through it and deal with it.
Yes. This time the cancer recovery was longer because I had to go through chemo for 6 months, right? And so it was like the months leading up to it, there's a month during, and there was one thing I can tell you. The biggest thing that got me through it was my mindset. I cannot control my circumstances. I cannot control how I feel physically, but I can control this one thing, which is my mindset. And so I chose not to be resentful of the circumstances. I chose to laugh whenever I could. Like a lot more things became funny to me. I chose to find things that I could do, like making jewelry and coloring and stuff. Like I made choices to feel good whenever I could. And it wasn't me being in denial, it wasn't avoiding anything. I was just like, I have control over one thing. I am going to use this. I'm going to squeeze all the juice out of it that I can. And I'm telling you, that works.
It really seems like you enjoyed being CEO. You enjoyed that job. Why'd you leave animals?
The company was never mine, right? Ultimately, I was given autonomy most of the time for most of my run there to run the business and without a lot of intervention. It's that tale as old as time is like when the going gets rough, a lot of people start acting out of fear. And I think what happened was the founder and I just fundamentally stopped agreeing on what the path forward was. And it wasn't tactical, it was more like philosophical, moral. The cool thing about us is we never agreed on anything ever, really. But that's what made our relationship work is because, like, I feel like, at least for me, I learned a lot from him by having a different perspective than mine, right? Once I wasn't able to come to the middle with him and it was gonna put me out in the world in a way that didn't reflect my actual beliefs, I realized that I would be putting the company in jeopardy by staying. I was like, my responsibility is to maintain the health of this business, and me being here is compromising that now. I made the decision in a week. It was like one big thing, and I was like, I will not do this. The founder was not flexible in that, and I was like, okay, I know what I have to do. And I talked to my leadership team, and I was like, listen, you will be more effective and influencing him without me here. I was like, you can just tell when there's like a break. and it was broken. And I was like, okay, honestly, it was one of the easiest decisions I've ever made, even though it was devastating and hard and I was really sad. I was like, I just knew in my bones it's a big thing to let go of. But at the time, I wasn't conflicted at all. I knew why. I knew that I was doing my job basically as CEO by leaving. And it was the right decision for the company too, for everybody. It would have been a chaotic mess. And I left it at the time that was right for me and I think was right for the company. So
Do you want to do it again? Run a company?
I didn't for a while. To be perfectly honest, I had my own stuff I had to work out afterwards. There were some things that scarred me a little. Like, I didn't care about helping people anymore. I needed a minute to, like, process it out, and I think what's been cool is the past 2 years, I've been able to help other agencies, and then that's been really fun. I may be on to my next project.
Oh, you heard it here.
Not as CEO, but I might have found my next project. So I never was gonna do consulting forever, and I knew that. I just had no idea what the next thing would look like, and I just let myself be curious and experiment for 2 years, and then I might have found it, the next right thing.
That's awesome. I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
Well, before we wrap up, and this has been an absolute blast, I'd love to ask you final question. You've probably gotten it a million times, but if you could give yourself one piece of advice when you're first starting out as CEO, what would you give yourself? What advice?
Just keep going. You're doing great. I'm proud of you. That's all I would say.
Thanks so much for listening. After the First Million is presented by Decimal. To listen to more episodes and find tips to help make running a business easier, visit decimal.com/AFM. Want to join the conversation? Reach out to me on LinkedIn and let's explore the messy middle.